Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. Conversation about the healing and restoration of our God-given glory. My name is Jake Kim, and I'm with my good friend, Bob Schutz. Bob, good to be with you. I'm happy that we're doing this.
Yeah, me too, Jake. We're finally here.
It's been a long time coming. And this first episode, we wanted to just get our own feet wet and kind of talk through what we're doing and be able to give our listeners a little bit of background on who we are. And so we have a little bit of a structure that we'll be doing with every episode. So we're going to start off usually with a story, some kind of story that talks about restore the glory and things that we've experienced in our own lives or things that we've seen in our accompanying of other people. Then we'll usually have a quote or a scripture that will kind of guide us for today. Then we'll talk about whatever topic we're going to talk about. Then we want to offer something at the end of every episode, which is a bit of an application section. So we'll take something that we've encountered or learned or whatever the years and try to actually help people understand that simple, practical thing that they can use in their everyday lives to experience restoration and healing. So today, I think we talked about our guiding quote today was going to be from St. Irenaeus, "The glory of God is man fully alive." And I think that's really one of the basic premises of this podcast in general for us is that we just want to be able to have conversations together that help people become fully alive. And today we're going to talk about our journey from maybe not so fully alive to more fully alive and how that applied to us. And so amidst all of that, let's give our listeners a bit of background about who we are. So Bob, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I was thinking even in terms of the title, I was working on another project today and a quote from Father Jacques Philippe, who's one of my favorite authors. And he says, all of us are born with a lack of being. And to me, that really reflects what you just said. The glory of God is man fully alive. To be fully alive is to be full in our being.
Amen.
For our being to be fully what God intended it to be.
Right.
And so I don't know about you, but I'm not there yet.
No.
And so there'll be some level of imperfect authenticity as we share about being fully alive, but we're on the journey. And I think that's
Amen to that.
That's the authenticity that any of us can do at this point of our life and striving and desiring more.
Yeah. What was it again? Fully being? What was the?
A lack of being.
Lack of being.
All of us are born with a
a
lack of being because of original sin.
How would you say that? Because I would imagine, when I ever have conversation, like you and I can have really deep conversations about theology or healing or whatever. And so, the person who always comes to my mind is my dad. And I love my dad. He's a great man. But he's your average guy who sits in the pew. Like he's your average churchgoer, goes to church on Sunday, great heart. But when you start using language, like I can imagine him going, being, what the heck does that mean? So I was thinking, hey, why don't we unpack that very quickly? Because that is the essence of really what we're doing. But what does it mean to have a lack of being? That's what I'm asking myself on his behalf. Like, why don't you kick it off? Why don't you start and then I'll respond to you?
That's great. Yeah. Well, I think if we look at babies and then we look at where we are.
Right.
And, a baby's born with a lack of being, but it has a lot of life. They're just able to be present.
Yes.
And I think when we see somebody that we're really drawn to, we're drawn to the life in them, to the sense of they seem to be comfortable in their own skin. They seem to be able to just be themselves.
Yeah.
And be fully alive.
Yeah.
And I think the frustration in my life, at least, is the places where I'm not yet fully alive. The places where I can feel the difference between what the gospel says that my life needs to be and what I experience. And the example that's most prevalent to me is in the areas of the fruit of the Spirit, where I know what joy that we are created for. I know that the Holy Spirit's full of joy.
Yes.
And that I'm called to be full of joy. But in a lot of places in my life, I'm not full of joy.
That's I haven't even thought about that, where you can walk through the fruits of the Spirit in your own life and kind of examine, where am I there? And I know that where we come from in our worldview would be that if I'm not full of joy, there's a reason. It's not just some random coincidence or whatever. There's a reason I'm not full of joy. And what we've experienced personally and professionally is that when you start to peel back the layers, if you want to use that analogy, or get under the surface, if you want to use that analogy, is that there are things that have happened in our lives that have affected us. So as humans, we are affected by experiences, and
Yes.
experiences change us. So, a baby is a great example where if you have a lot of negative experiences, that'll affect the baby and how they develop and how they grow up. If they have a lot of positive experiences, that affects them. And so what comes to mind is lack of being. Could we say it's a lack of human being who
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you were designed to be?
We often say, when we do something wrong, well, I'm only human.
Yeah, I was
And,
thinking the
and,
same thing.
and it's the exact opposite.
Right. Yeah.
Jesus is only human.
Right.
Mary is only human.
Right. Yeah.
We're a little less than human.
Right. Yes. We're fallen.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we're fallen. And,
Yeah.
and I think that's the essence of the quote. What does it mean to be fallen? And, for me, the way I experience that also is in love, because the joy comes from love,
Hmm.
right? And
Yep.
so wherever I'm lacking in joy or lacking in peace, I'm lacking in trust, I'm lacking in love.
Yes. That's so true. I experienced that in my day-to-day walk with God. I experienced that in my marriage. I experienced that in my interactions with people. And it's true when I think I can tell I'm fully alive for me when I'm not afraid. That's a big one for me. When I'm operating not in fear. So I guess I'd be in confidence or in peace when I'm operating
Yeah,
like that. And
yeah,
and it literally feels different. Like when I'm going through the day, I always say my heart, but I feel different. I react different. I'm more patient. I'm more kind. I'll spend more time with a person. I'm not hasty or,
yeah,
that. And I think those are like practical examples that, when I think about what is our podcast is we want to help people to be fully alive. We want to help them experience a restoration of their glory, restore the glory. And so I don't think many people walk around with this concept of I'm glorious.
yeah,
You'd almost hear it and go, that's prideful. I can't say that, or I can't go there.
yeah. So let me give it back to you. What is glory when we're talking about restoring the glory? What is glory in your mind?
Yeah, when I think about that, I think my head goes theological, and then I have
Uh-huh.
to take that theological concept and apply it. So here's my head went theological first and said, glory means I'm made in the image and likeness of God. And
Okay.
so I thought, if I'm made in his image and likeness, and that's not just a fancy phrase that I toss around when I'm around churchy people, like if that's
Yeah.
really true,
Yeah.
then that's incredible. Like
Yeah.
the person who created the mountains outside my window here created me, and I bear that creator's image. I'm like him more than those mountains per se. I bear more of his likeness than the mountains. And there's a whole bunch of philosophical things underneath the surface with that.
Yeah.
And so that means there's a great magnitude, there's a great power, there's a great light, there's a great life that I was designed to have. And because of sin and because of the experiences that I've had, both positive and negative, I'm sort of living to my full potential, my God given glory. Because it's not, when I
Yeah.
think about glory, I have to nuance things, say, it's not like I earned the glory. It's not like I'm trying to, make sure I can do 100 push-ups a day so my chest is all nice and big. And so then I go, now I'm glorious, right? That's not the type of glory that we're talking about. But it's, I think, living who God made me to be to the full.
Yes.
And when I do that, there's like you said, there's this, you can experience it. When somebody's living into their full glory, I find that you can tell, right? You get around them and you go, man, they're different. I like being around them. I feel life when I'm around them. I feel safe when I'm around them.
Yeah.
And they bring me life when I'm around them, or they help me know I'm loved. They help me know that I'm whatever. What
Yeah.
resonates with you? What would you say?
Yeah. As you're saying that, I'm thinking they're radiant,
Yeah.
which is to me a synonym for glory.
And it's not like you see them, but sometimes
Yeah.
people, it's like, wow, you're like bright today.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like Moses coming down from the mountain, right? After he's been with God, or
Yeah.
Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. I mean, they're radiant in glory. And as opposed to what the church fathers talked a lot about, was just vainglory, which is, the worldly
Mm.
kind of glory, which is, what you were talking about of my chest is puffed up and
Yeah, right.
I'm great at all this. And there is a certain level of glory living to our potential in, let's say, as an athlete or as a
Yes.
scientist or as a mother or as a father. There's a glory in that, but it's not an external glory for my selfish ego.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of God. I mean, it's like my life is reflecting God. My life is pointing people to God
Mm.
when
It
I'm reflecting his glory.
it reminds me of the analogy that some of the maybe it's the church fathers that used it when they talked about Mary, and they said she's like the moon,
Yeah, yeah,
like a bright, bright moon. And the only reason the moon's bright is because of the sun. She
yes,
doesn't generate her own light, she just reflects it. And
yeah.
that's probably similar to
That's
us.
that's a
There's
good
yeah,
that's good.
because we're at our new house now. We moved into our new house, and
Oh,
we're on a bit
wow.
of land. And I just, this is something about, talk about glory. My heart being designed. I was not designed to live in a city. Like that's not for me. But it was not long ago that I looked up. It was a full moon, and
Yeah,
and we didn't need to turn on any lights outside.
wow.
It was completely dark, and we could
Yeah,
walk all over our property, and we didn't need a light because the moon put all the light down that you needed. Now, it wasn't as bright as the sun,
yeah,
but it was amazing how
yeah.
light it actually got.
That's a great example. Yeah, I remember one time going out with my cousin out from Miami halfway to the Bahamas,
Mm,
and we stayed there overnight,
mm,
and I have never seen the stars like that and the moon like that. It was like it lit up the whole place.
wow.
It's like we didn't need any lights.
Yeah.
And it was like, "Wow, this is amazing."
Yeah.
And again, it reveals the glory of God, right?
Amen.
It's not glory in itself, it's just reflective glory.
Yeah. Amen. And I think that, that's the desire of the podcast, is that we've devoted a large part of our lives. I would even emphasize professionally, but I'd say even more personally, to
Yeah.
experiencing restoration. And it's a restoration not so that we can have vainglory, but it's a restoration because we want the glory of God to shine through. We want people to encounter God. And so I guess how I'd say it, let me know how you'd say it, but I think how I'd say it is that there are particular ways, there are means, tools, whatever word you want to use there, a journey by which we can experience restoration. It's not flippant, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
It's not like just throw the dart and hope it hits the bullseye. I like the way that John Eldridge says this phrase, there's a way things work. And that's the
Yeah.
way God designed it. And I think when I think about the process of restoration, there is a way that it works. And, professionally, you and I have been doing that for quite a while, learning and receiving and offering this, these ways of restoration.
Yeah, and I think both of us out of our hunger for our own restoration. And so it wasn't, it wasn't just we want this for other people.
Yeah.
We were hungry for it ourselves because of what we each have experienced in our life. And then as we experienced that and we began to see the reality of that, then the desire, once you've received something like that, the
Yeah.
desire to help other people experience that. Why don't we start with that story for each of us, huh?
Yeah. Let's do it. You go first.
Okay. Uh, as you know, I grew up in a Catholic family,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm one of 7 kids until my dad's remarriages, which I'll get into in a second. And
Are
I
you
had
the
3.
oldest, or where do you fall?
I'm the second oldest.
Second oldest.
I had a brother Dave
Okay.
who died about 25 years ago, and I'll
Mm,
hopefully share that story at some point
okay.
along the way. But
Yeah.
so I was second oldest, and we were in what looked like a perfect, with the word perfect emphasized, Catholic family.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere we go, what a beautiful family. And
Mm,
my parents were very active in parish life and beyond that in the diocese, working with Christian family movement,
yeah.
uh, working with seminarians and priests, and
Mm,
we went to Catholic schools. It was like an extended family living in the same city.
mm,
It's like I grew up. My childhood was a pretty solid, happy childhood. There was events that weren't, but overall.
yeah.
And in the middle of that, one of the events that really changed the course of my family history was my dad's father and grandmother were living with us.
Mm,
We were away, and there was a fire in the house,
mm.
and they died.
Oh,
And my dad hadn't reconciled with his parents, and
Mm,
his dad in that case, and his mom had died the year before, and so he started really struggling.
mm,
And again, all the places in his life that hadn't been dealt with
yeah.
and worked through. And so he began to drink, and then as he began to drink and work more and be away from the family, and he was a good dad. He was my coach and everything else. I really loved my dad.
Yeah.
And he died 2 years ago, but I loved him. I still love him. But in the middle of that, he began being unfaithful to my mom.
Mm,
When I was about 12, 13 years old,
mm,
we found out about it, and
mm,
it just really disrupted that confidence that you talk about.
mm,
It's like I had this confidence. I just really felt loved and
mhm,
and felt secure. And it was
mhm,
like the security got ripped away in my life.
mm. Would that
And
be like a loss of glory?
yeah, I literally went just even on an external focus. I went from getting really good grades to struggling in school, doing
Wow.
really well in sports to struggling in sports, being a really happy kid to not knowing it, but becoming depressed. I can look
Mm.
back and see that I painted my uncle's room with him, painted his windows black.
Wow.
Now, if that isn't a sign of not only his depression but mine,
Wow.
uh, not let any light in. That feels like a good description of where my soul was in that year,
Yes.
and not knowing if my dad was alive or dead because I didn't see him for over a year.
Wow.
And so, I look at that as one of those moments in which glory was robbed,
Mm.
what God intended in my
Mhm.
life. And I
Mhm.
think a big push for me seeking a deeper relationship with God. And yet, at that point, really, it was a breach in my relationship with God
Mm.
is because my relationship with God was really filtered through what I saw with my family and what I believed was true. And then my dad betraying the things that he had taught me.
Mm.
So much of what's going on in the church, is
Mm.
similar thing as we see the church and the priesthood in some ways becoming tarnished by the behavior of some of the priests. It really shakes our faith at a fundamental level. And
Yeah.
that's what it was like for me as a child.
Mm.
So that's kind of the beginning of the background. We'll get into much more after that. But
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
for you? How would you
Yeah.
describe your earlier years?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but it's just, I'm processing in my mind and heart because I know you quite well and I can just see the ripple effect of that. And it's not even your fault. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's not like
yeah,
you chose it. It's not like you did something wrong. It's just the reality of the world in which we live, that there is an enemy and the enemy is always after the degradation of people, of
yeah,
individuals. And yeah, my story is, it's similar in effect, different in specifics, so the background you mentioned, your grandparents, and so my grandparents on my mom's side, really great family. Like I remember having great memories with them, very similar to you. But my grandfather struggled with alcoholism and
uh,
he would become abusive. And then my mom had to experience and witness all of that. And
wow,
her upbringing was this weird mixture of really wonderful and really awful. And
yeah,
so when that happened for her, that affected her. And so then she had my older two brothers. My mom and dad had my older two brothers, and then she had a miscarriage, and then she had me. I think that's how the storyline goes. And when she had me, she was just like at her wits' end. I mean, she couldn't handle life anymore, and so she got really unwell right after I was born, and had to
mm,
address a lot of her own personal stuff. And so I had the feeling of abandonment. And
yeah,
so then that experience of abandonment was very, very early in my life. And then fast forward, about 6 years, and then I stumble upon pornography as a boy. And
uh,
so I have this combination of experiencing the abandonment of my primary caregiver, my mom, and then being exposed to pornography where I'm getting this very distorted image of women. And you
yeah,
put those two together, and that had a really interesting combination for me in my heart about how do I receive love and what's going to make me happy. And I mean, I could fill in the blanks, but I'd say that's one of those key turning points in my life. The interesting thing about that is, you and I both speak and we do conferences and all kinds of stuff. And I think it's probably worth mentioning that, you know, my mom and dad know all of this. We've talked about all this, and they're okay with me sharing these personal skeletons in the
Yeah.
closet. And they
Yeah.
actually had a beautiful. I was so just moved by this. My mom and dad. I was talking to them and said, I'm starting to speak a lot more. And my parents said, if our skeletons or whatever can help other people, then you say it. And
Yeah.
I just thought, what a beautiful thing that, because it's a big part of my story, right? It's a big part of
Yeah.
what I do. And if I couldn't share my own personal story, it wouldn't quite be as real, like
Yeah.
I've lived
Yeah.
this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's so beautiful, and the healing that comes even by those conversations. Same thing with my mom and dad. Is everything that I've written, everything that I've talked about, I've submitted to them and said, "If there's anything in here that you're not okay with,
Yeah.
I'll prudently not communicate it." But they've been great. And one time, my brother Bart and I were giving a men's conference with a
Mm.
group of other men, and my dad was there.
Ooh.
And each of us, our story centers around the brokenness. Bart was 8 years younger than me, so he was 5 when
Mm.
my dad left, and
Mm.
so as each of us are giving these very intense, emotional accounts of our story
Yes.
and how God's intervened in that, and including the healing in our family, and healing with my dad, healing in our family after that. And my dad's there, and he's just crying, and
Mm.
and I'm sitting there saying, "Oh, I hurt his heart. I
Mm.
hurt his heart." And so I go up to him afterwards. He gives me this huge embrace.
Mm.
I says, "How you doing, Dad?" He says, "Oh, I'm just really hurting, but I'm so, so happy."
Wow.
And I
Wow.
said, "Well, tell me." He says, "Oh, just every time I hear, it takes me deeper into the pain of what I caused you, and I
Mm.
caused your brother, caused our whole family." He says, "But it also brings a deeper healing in my heart." And he
Mm.
says, "I'm also crying because I realized that I never had a chance to do this with my dad. And I'm
Mm.
just so grateful that God would bring us here and we'd be able to do this."
Yeah.
And so he said, "But I can't resolve it with my dad." And
Mm.
I said, "Yeah, you can." And it
Mm.
just so happened we were doing a men's retreat where you were focusing on your relationship with your parents and the
Mm.
healing that's needed. And so he spent the next hour having a
Wow.
conversation with Jesus and through Jesus to his dad. And he came back and he was radiant.
Oh.
And he said, "You guys opened my heart in a way to heal this relationship that's been there my whole life." And at the end of the retreat, he gets up, and because some of the guys said, "How can you sit there and hear your sons talk like
Yeah.
that?"
Yeah.
We were being respectful, but just in
Yep.
pain.
Yeah.
And he says it's joy. So at the end, we asked him to stand up and just share with the guys, and it was just so redemptive, so
Amen.
beautiful. Yeah,
Amen. To
that's
kind of
restoring the glory.
Amen. Absolutely. That's what I was about to say. And, as we, you know, how about we'll talk about our professional background in another episode?
That's
Because,
what I'm thinking too. Yeah.
yeah, awesome. There's two things that jumped out at me as you were sharing that story about the experience of restoration. And one was honesty. There
Yeah.
was a need to be honest. You had to be honest with yourself about your experiences. And for your dad to be able to experience restoration, he had to be honest even about his darkness, his sin. He was
Yeah.
willing to be honest. And then there was a second thing is he was open. And
Yes.
we'll get into the technical parts about why people struggle to be honest or open, and maybe there's a lie or a vow. Those words. We'll get into that down the road. But I just think it's important to kind of label that right off the bat. I don't know about you, but in my own life, and then as I've worked with other people, I've realized that if they're not willing to be honest and open, it's really hard to move forward. There's reasons usually why they're
Yes.
struggling to
Yeah.
be honest or open, but it can sound almost like Hollywood or, oh, that's just a nice Disney movie or Hallmark movie that you guys just talked about. But it's real, right? I've
Oh,
experienced those things in my life. But why? I guess that's we wanted to give people a practical every episode. One thing that's jumping out to me, and I'm curious what a practical would be for you in this story. You and Bart and your father were willing to be honest and open. And there's a whole lot of other things that happened, but that was a key part of it. And that helped facilitate this restoration of glory. What do you see on the practical level?
well, I go back to what you talked about with the pornography at a young age,
Mm.
and I was also exposed to pornography at a young age,
Mm.
and what that did was the opposite of honesty. I began to hide.
Yes.
It's like this isn't okay for me to be seen. And so at a practical level, I think it's really important. One is to know that God is a God who loves us even in those places where most of us fear that he's going to hate us and reject us. And so that we can practically bring that to him, whether it's in confession, whether it's just one-on-one.
Mm.
But secondly, that we have other people around us. And I don't think any of us can get honest unless we know that we're going to be received well and not reject ourselves the way we've been rejected. And
Mhm.
so I think the other practical is what's our relationship with people when they get honest?
Wow.
Uh, can we be the safe people for
Mm.
people to be honest? And
Mhm.
in other words, are they going to be met with judgment and criticism and rejection, or are they going to be met with love and mercy and compassion? And
Yes.
that's the beauty of the gospel is, we can bring our shame, like the woman caught in adultery, and he was without a sin, throw the first stone.
Yes.
And so practically, I would like everybody, including us, to have the freedom to have places to go where we know that we're going to be received, and for us to be the people that other people can come to, that they can be received.
Absolutely. Bob, that's so important. And all these practicals are clicking in my head of what does that mean to be someone who can receive another? There's a lot there that maybe they were never taught about how to, the clinical phrase that sometimes you hear is hold space. And for some reason, those little phrases sometimes they sound weird, but it's how to be
Yeah,
present to somebody and how to
yeah,
be with somebody and not talk when they don't need somebody to talk to them. And, there's just so many practicals with what you're describing. And those are the kinds of things we want to get into about what does it look like to
yeah,
be able to be a good listener. That's not the fullness of the healing. It's just listening, but it's an important part of it, to offer a
yeah,
safe place for people.
yeah.
Yeah,
And it requires a lot of work in our own hearts
it sure
to be
does.
able to be that, because our stuff gets in the way, which I'm sure we'll talk about over.
We got a long road ahead of us to be able to break all these things down. I guess one more thing that I know I do this, and I can probably do it to a fault is, and I'm curious what your thoughts. So just kind of one final thought here is, one of the things I feel like you and I do very naturally, and we've probably been doing this since we were little, is I feel like we're the kind of people who are looking underneath the surface.
Yeah,
And so face value has its value. And then there's probably something underneath that, And what we're really talking about from a conceptual point of view is motive and desire and things like that. But I think on a very simple level, you and I are the kind of guys who will see a situation or will have an experience, and then we're peeling back a layer and going, why is that? What's
yeah.
underneath that? Do you find you do that too?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the nature that we are created with. That's part of each of our individual uniqueness.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of our glory, but that has also been really fitted for the work that God's called us to do in our lives in
Yeah.
all of that way. So yeah, all the time. Margie would get mad at me going to a movie because I couldn't enjoy the movie. I was always looking for the
So true.
point. So what's the motive of the writer of the movie? And
Right.
and if it was off base, it ruined the whole movie for
That's
me.
so true. Oh man, Bob, we are such kindred spirits. Like our people don't know this, but we have the same birthday, and we've always found that thing that unites us. But I'm the same way. I'd be the guy at the restaurant, and and Heather's talking to me, and I'm looking over at the couple across the way, and I'm going, "Oh no, they're in a fight."
Yeah.
And why is he talking like that? Or why, why is she saying that? And Heather's like, we're now in a fight. You need like, forget about
Yeah.
that couple. And I couldn't help it. I'm at the movie and I'm watching people watch the movie instead of watching the movie,
Yeah.
Oh, just part of who we are. But
Yeah.
anyway, Bob, this has been great. And we've got all kinds of fun places where we're going to go from here. And we're just excited to start this. And so to all of our listeners, thanks for kicking this off with us. And we hope that if you like this episode, you'd be willing to share it with a friend or send them to iTunes or places that you find podcasts. Our website for the podcast is restoretheglorypodcast.com. And you can go there to find all of our episodes and information and whatnot. And upcoming in a future episode, you'll hear more about Bob and I's professional background, but we're just excited to get this process going, and we're excited to have this journey with you. And we hope that God blesses you and that you continue to experience the restoration of your God-given glory.